Right, so there has been a serious escalation in tensions getting on for a week now between Israel and the Houthis in Yemen, largely going underreported or falling down the news agenda somewhat behind the fall of Syria and the subsequent aftermath of that. But it matters because where the focus has been on things ostensibly going Israel's way, where they are continuing to lay siege to Gaza, continuing to abuse the ceasefire with Lebanon to gain more territory, and obviously the territory seizures going on in Syria now as well, things are absolutely not going all their way. But they have been trying to turn that around, and with US assistance, some severe airstrikes on Yemen's capital Sanaa have been going on by way of retaliation. You would think by now that Israel and their allies would learn that the Houthis just won't back down. They'll just carry on. That history of conflicts with Yemen and the Houthis would tell them that. But it hasn't sunk in, it seems. And with the Houthis largely now being one part of Iran's axis of resistance that have not suffered, obviously, from disrupted supply lines, could we begin to see a concerted escalation with more focus on Houthi attacks on Israel in the name of defending Gaza going forwards now? Right, so the Houthis in Yemen, they've been busy again. Whilst Israel have been gloating over their continued destruction of Gaza, over the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, to the al-Qaeda leftovers of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, that they supported, to the ground they're making up in Lebanon when they are supposed to be leaving Lebanon instead, making a mockery of that ceasefire, and Lebanon still sticking to it, looking more and more weak, frankly, as it becomes more and more inexplicable as to why they're doing that. So the Houthis have been giving Israel itself a bit of a pasting, but it's sort of fallen down the news agenda and hasn't garnered so much attention. So let's give it a little bit of attention. On Monday, the Houthis fired another one of their Palestine II ballistic hypersonic missiles. Hypersonic is the claim that they have, targeting a military site near Tel Aviv. Now, as is often the case, the Houthis claim their objectives were achieved. That is generally what comes out in their following statements. Israel will claim it was shot down and never hit its mark. Who's telling the truth? Anyone's guess without independent verification. But this is what we've become used to in the tit-for-tat, strike-for-strike world of Israeli and Houthi interaction. That said, though, there's been reports coming out of Israel that whether this missile did hit or not, it did send settlers running for shelters. So when the Houthis claim their objectives are being achieved, and that is always the wording they choose, doesn't necessarily mean the strike was successful. Perhaps that wasn't the aim. In my view, if the aim is simply to serve to disrupt civilian life, remind Israel that they are not invincible and are being targeted because of what their government is doing, that serves a purpose too. Meanwhile, the Houthis are, of course, still causing massive problems for pro-Israel shipping in the Red Sea and the surrounding waters. The US Navy now undertaking efforts to escort its own supply vessels. Doesn't bother the Houthis one iota. Drones and missiles were used to target all the shipping. Commercial US vessels and 2 naval destroyers were targeted this week in the Gulf of Aden. And this elicited much appreciation and praise and a response from the resistance committees in Gaza, who released a statement thanking the Houthis, saying, "We congratulate the Yemeni missile strike that targeted the Zionist entity. The Yemeni missile strike on the Zionist entity confirms the continuation of the support fronts from the resistance axis for Gaza and its resistance, and in response to the ongoing massacres and slaughters committed by the army of Zionist war criminals against our Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip. Scenes of the Zionists fleeing to shelters confirm that the government of war criminal Netanyahu will bring nothing but destruction and fear to the Zionists and dispel the illusions and dreams of Netanyahu and the gang of fascist extremists in the Zionist entity, and confirm that everything these criminals promise them is nothing but pipe dreams and a mirage. Greetings to the men of God in the Yemeni Arab army who continue their strikes and heroic support operations for Gaza and its resistances despite the great sacrifices and what the Yemen of Arabism and Islam is exposed to from US and UK aggression and siege." Yes, those US and UK strikes. They'd attacked Yemen the previous weekend, and so this Palestine II missile launch was as much a retaliation to that as a continuation of Houthi retaliations on Israel and their allies due to Israel's ongoing assault and occupation on Gaza. This strike, though, saw the US and UK strike Yemen again on Monday night into Tuesday, this time targeting the Yemeni Ministry of Defence in Sanaa, a joint US and UK assault, with the US Central Command announcing in the aftermath that on December 16th Yemen time, US Central Command, CENTCOM, forces conducted a precision airstrike against a key command and control facility operated by Iran-backed Houthis within Houthi-controlled territory in Sanaa, Yemen. Oh yes, they're Iran-backed, aren't they? Let's never forget they're Iran-backed, though The optics that Israel is US-backed ought to be more and more obvious by the fact the US is involved and are sending out the statement here. The US military are offering updates on their responses to Houthi attacks on behalf of the genocidal apartheid state for being genocidal and conducting apartheid in Palestine, as they very much are. They always put out these statements as if we should be cheering them as heroes instead of physically repulsing us by their actions, ordered by men who have in too many cases been bought and paid for by pro-Zionist interests anyway. Well, as I said at the start, the Houthis don't respond well to that, do they? You'd think Israel's allies would know that by now, the number of times the Houthis have kept on retaliating. And so yet again, the Houthis reminded them of said fact. Not that I expect any more notice will be taken of them this time around, more than any other. But it is still an escalation, since this time the Houthis didn't set off one of their hypersonic Palestine 2 missiles, they fired off 2 of them. Doubling down, literally, and was followed by a very pointed statement from the Houthi spokesperson Yahya Saree. He said, "The Yemeni Armed Forces, YAF, announces the targeting of military facilities in the Tel Aviv area with 2 Palestine 2 hypersonic ballistic missiles." The YAF said that the operation was carried out during the Israeli aggression on the capital Sanaa and the Hadada governorate. YAF also affirmed that the Israeli aggression will not deter Yemen and the Yemenis from performing the religious and moral duty in responding to its massacres in the Gaza Strip, as well as responding to this brutal aggression by continuing support and striking all hostile targets with appropriate weapons. Now, this latest attack by Yemen came just yesterday, yet overnight the US have again attacked Yemen with Israeli airstrikes coming as well, and in typical Israeli fashion, the targets have not been military as the Houthi targets have been. They have been domestic and civilian targets. Notably, a power station in Sanaa was destroyed, killing 9 people, and this too has to be seen as an escalation, with Israeli allies now seeing the Houthis as one of the last remaining bits of Iran's axis of resistance to essentially deal with. So there ought to be an expectation that they're going to become more of a focus going forwards. But as to whether or not it'll make any difference, well, history tells a different story. The Houthis crippled Israeli shipping in the Red Sea, putting their southern port of Eilat out of business, bankrupting it when they don't even possess a navy. Every time the US has gone to war with them, they've ended up giving up because they just can't get anywhere. And 12 years of war with Saudi Arabia taught the Saudis the same thing. Whilst the Houthis are always certainly considered underdogs, and Yemen is absolutely a really poor Islamic nation, you just don't ever bet against them to not find a solution, no matter how things might look. They've gone from attacking ships with dinghies and $100 drones to now being capable of directly targeting Israel itself with hypersonic ballistic missiles. The targets they could have chosen but haven't, only ever picking military targets and not civilian ones, stands in stark contrast to those Israeli ones who have no conscience about striking civilian areas. The Houthis' response to this? Well, they've said to expect one. So of course we will, won't we? Israel is overstretched now, warring on so many fronts. They're more and more reliant on others to do dirty work for them, and the Houthis, they have far fewer targets. And they'll keep going because they just aren't wired up to quit. This is a religious and moral cause to them, after all. They've said as much. The only way they're going to stop is if Israel gets out of Gaza. The Houthis have said this from the start. Those fighting with Israel are defending Israel's right to keep on committing genocide, not its right to defend itself. So it's not hard to see who is right and who is wrong here. And that's an optic no amount of media cover can bury either. Of course, where the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu and his mad defence minister Israel Katz will pontificate and posture over taking on the Houthis, they got bigger problems closer to home. That genocide in Gaza began as a prerequisite to eliminating Hamas as a force, didn't it? Not only has Israel failed to do that, but their actions have possibly been the biggest recruiting drive for Hamas that they've ever seen. Far from being eliminated, it turns out that Hamas have now grown by the tune of thousands in recent months, and all of a sudden Gaza doesn't look as beaten as many might have thought it was. Get all the details of that shock turn of events, which has sent Netanyahu reeling, in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe if you've not already done so to keep up to date with new daily content on this channel and help support the channel too, which is enormously appreciated. And I will hopefully catch you on the next video. Cheers folks.